I think we're live, but yeah, it looks like we're live. So, got a couple minutes here before we start. But hey, look, good morning, folks. Look, wherever you are out there, welcome. You are listening to the Charge Life podcast. I am Joseph Barletta, and this is where we discuss EVs and all things EV charging. Glad you could pull over and park with us today. So, let's get plugged in. Hey, look, this episode's all about the magic behind Tesla Cybertruck's split charging capabilities using their new DPDT contactor, which basically is a contactor that allows them to charge on both 400-volt charging stations as well as 800-volt charging stations. So, look, I promise you, you're going to love this one. Hey, before we begin today's episode, is brought to you by Smart Charge America. Since 2007, Smart Charge America has installed tens of thousands of EV charging stations nationwide, and they can do the same for you today. Whether in the home, commercial, or service, let their team of expert installation specialists guide you to the best charging solution for your new electric car. After all, if you can't charge, you can't drive. Go ahead and visit smartchargeamerica.com today to get started. Okay, so today's topic, the magic behind Tesla's Cybertruck DPDT charge capabilities. Basically, what that stands for is dual pull, dual throw contactor. So it's basically a switch. Okay, so what is the DPDT switch we're talking about? Okay, well, in layman's terms, it's basically a device that splits the battery pack in two. So, depending on the charging station's voltage, that it's dispensing and the vehicle that is actually being plugged in, there could be some variations. And the two most commonly forms of variation in that inside the EV industry is 400 volt and 800 volt. So think of it in difference in size. Think of it like the difference in size of, let's say, a garden hose, which is, let's say, the end of a garden hose is 400 volts, and the end of a fire hose, like a fire truck or fire hydrant hose, right? That's 800 volts. So you can see the openings are massively a lot bigger for the 800 volts as opposed to the 400 volts. So just think of that. And so the device simply allows Tesla to offer both the ability to charge when pulling up to a 400 volt charger with the garden hose, and then when it pulls up to an 800 volt charger, it opens up and it has the ability to open up like a fire hydrant hose. So, or a fire hose. So, that being said, that is essentially what the dual pull, dual throw DPDT switch does inside the new Cybertruck. Now, this is the only Tesla vehicle that has this capability and this functionality to it. So it'd be really interesting to see when Tesla actually uh, starts, building their V4 Superchargers, which they have so far, but we haven't really saw the cabinets behind the actual gates and the power distribution, which what they're promising um, somewhere around 1,000 volts, used in about 615 amps. So we'll get more on that later on in the conversation. But let's just say, like, what this switch does is it just decreases the amount of charging time that the Cybertruck will experience when it's pulling up to those version 4 superchargers. So, for instance, let's take you have a Model Y, okay, and that Model Y has a 400-volt battery architecture, and it's got a 75 kWh size battery pack. Okay, well, if it pulls up to a V3 supercharger, which is also 400 volts, right? We talked about the garden hose; it's also 400-volt charging system. Um, Basically, the dispensing of that unit typically, let's just say 250 amp, the 250 kW. So in theory, you have a 75 kW battery pack size, and you're dividing it by 250 kilowatts that's going into the actual battery pack. So in theory, you'll be able to charge 0 to full in 18 minutes. Okay, that's in theory. I know that we're going to have a lot of people out there like, oh, what about the charging curve and the battery temperature and the dynamics and the state of charge? And yes, I'm just using layman's terms. I'm just doing real simple math. 75 divided by 250, that gives you 18 minutes to 0 to full. Okay, we all know charging doesn't work that way because of DC fast charging, charging curves, all that good stuff. But for this episode, we're just talking about that. Okay, so now you take the Cybertruck. Okay, so the Cybertruck's got a 123 kilowatt hour battery pack. Okay, and you do the same math. So you have a 800 volt Cybertruck, big fire hose, being plugged into a garden hose supercharger, which is the V3 400 volt superchargers that Tesla has. Okay, and so that's 250 kW, and what you have is 123 kilowatts divided by 250 kilowatts, which is kilowatt hours. Sorry, 123 kilowatt hour battery pack divided by 250 kilowatts, which is the speed of the charge. It's the max charging rate at that particular charger. and that basically means that the supercharger or the Cybertruck, it's to the supercharger, it'll take like 30 minutes to reach a full charge from 0 to full. Again, layman's terms, that's taking into account preconditioning, battery temperature, thermal management systems, battery management systems, uh, chemistries, and everything else, state of charge, and all that stuff. We're just talking just layman's terms. 123 divided by 250 is 30 minutes for the charge. Okay, so now that's when the Cybertruck at 800 volts is plugging into a 400-volt charger. Now, let's take into account Tesla's all new version 4 superchargers. Okay, those version 4 superchargers, they're operating somewhere around 1,000 volts and using current flow of about 615 amps. So that gives that charging station dispenser the ability to max out at about 650 kW. Okay, so but remember, just that's the on the charging side of things. Remember, on the Cybertruck side of things, it's 800-volt architecture. So let's say Cybertruck pulls up to that V4 supercharger, right? And both are fire hose links. Okay, both of them link in, and they're gonna go ahead and draw. Let's say the Cybertruck says, "Hey, look, I'm at 800 volts, and I'm charging at 440 amps. That's my current. What can you give me?" Supercharger says, "Yep, I got you at 800. I can do 1,000, but I got you at 800, and I got you at 440. I could do 615, but I got you at 440. No problem. Let's rock and roll." And so, based on the vehicle's limitations and the charging station dispensing rate, let's say that charger, that Cybertruck's able to charge at 350 kW, like the recent videos with Lars and Drew Baglino with Sandy Monroe and all that good stuff. I'll put links below in this episode on those. Um, but basically, what that does is that allows you now, and you can take a 123 kilowatt hour battery pack, you divide it by 350 kW, and that pulls down that charge time 0 to full from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. So that really means a lot. If you take 2 million Cybertrucks out on the road that are, plugging into these superchargers, their ability to get on and off the plug as fast as possible and get done, get to their next trip and their next destination is critically important to Tesla, as well as it keeps those plugs being open and, you know, switched and constantly being used, which is increases their utilization, which also increases their revenue point for those actual superchargers. So, this isn't the first vehicle that's actually like done this, but what we're seeing, it's kind of intuitive engineering that they did with the DP DT switch there. Now we know that the Hummer EV has a 213 kilowatt hour battery pack and it has similar capabilities to charge at both 400 volts. I think they charge around 150 kW and 800 volts, which they're able to basically double their stuff and charge at about 350 kW plus. And so we'll talk about that here. But using the switch inside their system, basically when they pull up to a 400-volt DC fast charger, it puts the two stacked battery packs that they have in parallel, and so that allows them to charge at 150 kW. So basically, it takes like an hour and 20 minutes, probably even longer, to reach a full charge if you're 0 to full and pulling up to that. That's just due to limitations on that end. So, but when pulling up to a 800-volt DC fast charging station, the Hummer, since it can take that 800 volts, it places the two battery packs that are stacked together. It places them in series, and so what that does is it shifts, like the Hummer shifts from 350-volt architecture to 700 volts, and so that double voltage, okay, put on a 350 kW DC fast charger, you'll see it pull somewhere around 600 amps plus, or even more. We don't even know. Like we don't have enough data here to like from our studies and what we've seen to be able to determine. But we've seen about 365 kW is the max kind of peak power rating from what we're seeing out of the 350 kW EA chargers that we've seen the Hummer actually charge, up on. So not sure what will get out of the Tesla superchargers once it's, let's say, the Hummer connects to a V4 supercharger. So that'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. But we'll have more. We'll probably do an episode next year on that particular thing. But again, we talked about the high voltage between the car and the charger, and you have to figure out, what charging station you're going to, whether it's a 400-volt charger or if it's 800-volt charger, and then you have to know your vehicle, whether or not the vehicle sits on a 400-volt architecture or an 800-volt architecture. So they are pretty much like kind of the same. But if you look at the Tesla superchargers in general, they have kind of well, now they have four categories of superchargers. You have your urban superchargers, which generally operate at 400 volts, okay, and they distribute 72 kilowatts um, of power feeding each one of their posts. So you pull up, there's no dynamic site split, all that good stuff. You pull up to it, you're getting 72 kilowatts, and you look at the version 2 superchargers, okay, these are 400-volt superchargers, but they're maxed at 150 kilowatts per cabinet. And so you have each cabinet filling, basically distributing power to two posts. Okay. So basically one car plugs in, you're charging at 150, another car comes and pulls in next to you, boom, it splits the power 75. It just takes a little bit longer for you to reach your full charge. So this is the way the Tesla supercharger was originally rolled out, right? And of course, once Tesla got their hands on the V3 technology, they've gone and upgraded most of the V2 sites, and they also have been installing at record numbers the V3 versions, which are still 400-volt chargers, but you're looking at 250 kW cabinets, and those cabinets basically feed four posts each. And so I mean, technically, the cabinets are like 375 kW each that are feeding those four posts, but that allows you to get 250 kW at each one of those posts, no matter where you plug in. But it ultimately depends, again, your charging curve, preconditioning batteries, your state of charge, all of that stuff, to where they know that they can distribute 250 kW to a car for like 10 minutes, and then as it tapers, then it gives another car 250. So and that's all the way up to 370. That's how it does that through it's kind of intuitive linked system that they link these DC buses between charging cabinets that allow for optimal site power level distribution. And so that's really unique. That's like we've seen Tesla's like kind of the only ones that are doing that right now. And so they're planning on doing that. You could just expect them to do that with their version 4 DC fast chargers, what we'll talk about now. So this is their fourth model, the version 4, which is coming in at 800 volts. Okay, we're probably going to see the cabinets somewhere around 350 kW per cabinet, feeding, four posts, maybe even more. What we know that on the dispenser side of things is the dispensers have the ability to dispense at 1,000 volts using about 615 amps. So that's a pretty heavy load, 615 kW that can come out of each one of those dispensers. So it's all about what we see those cabinets behind the fence actually able to be able to generate. But keep in mind that Tesla has that linked kind of DC links. So I call them DC links because it's basically DC bus bars that are uh, I guess built between each one of the actual charging cabinets on site behind the fence that allows for, again, optimal site power level distribution. So it's really unique, really intuitive for the Tesla supercharger community. So all things considered, if you look at the vehicles that are currently operating at that 800 volt, the Cybertruck just released, yes, they are operating at 800 volts, but you also have the, what is it, the Audi e-tron GT. You have, I believe, the Taycan, the Ioniq 5, EV6, as well as the Lucid Air. So we see those, and when it comes to those types of vehicles being able to use the Tesla supercharging network, with the Magic Dock or with an adapter, there are some limiting factors where we always hear about, let's say, a Lucid, Air plugging into a Tesla supercharger, and it's only able to get 50 kW. Well, how is that possible? It's 800-volt architecture vehicle. It's pulling up to a 400 volt, charger. It should be able to get a little bit more than just 50 kW. Why is that the case? Well, it's because it not only dumbs down and cuts the actual voltage in half, but it also has a limiting power factor of the amount of amps that it's actually able to take. So that's kind of how you have that particular setup there. So if you remember, the most common thing to understand when we're talking about all of this is that the when it comes to power, okay, it's volts times amps equals power. So volts is how large your hose is. Amps is how much water you turned on and how fast that's flowing. And then, of course, if you have that basically just water in your garden, how much water is actually flowing out at any given time, hitting that garden, right? So that's your power. And so we always kind of refer to it in the plumbing sense, because it makes it easier for us to kind of understand it. But if you look at the Tesla superchargers, so they can dispense around 400 volts, right, on all the version 3 superchargers. And you look at the battery pack level, inside the EV. So you have 400 volts, battery pack levels at 400. Okay, perfect. Now those match. We talked about this earlier. So if you look at with some slight variation of it, but let's just keep it simple, 400, 400. But if you look at the Model S Plaid, well, that vehicle is based on a 420 volt architecture. So you plug into a supercharger that also matches it at 420 volts. Okay, so basically now they're going to distribute, let's say, 600 amps, for that connection. And so hose, 600 amps is what's going to be flowing through it. That gives you your 250 kW charging speed. Okay, so now the V3s, we know those superchargers can dispense around 700 amps. And so looking at we pretty much have seen a max of 650 to 680 amps being passed through those cables, those supercharger cables. And that's pretty unique because we do know that the supercharger cables are liquid cooled cables. And so if uh, you don't see any of this on the back end, but that's why the cables are a little bit thicker than, let's say, if you go to the urban supercharger cables. You can slightly see it, but yeah, those V3 supercharger cables, they are a lot thicker as they have that liquid cooled cable management system built in. So again, we talked about the Lucid Air. Now, the Lucid Air basically has what they refer to in their onboard charger as a kind of an onboard booster with their Wonder Box. And so it's basically a DC to DC converter built into the EV itself, which is unique. Okay, so you have an 800 volt charger, and it's plugging into a 400 volt charging station. Well, you have to dumb that you have to have some device that basically dumbs down that voltage to 400 amps to where it's actually able to receive. Now the problem is, again, we looked at the 400 amps. Now it's got a limited capacity of 125 amps. So 400 volts at 125 amps means that it's got a garden hose, but you kind of turn the hose on like by 30%. And it's flowing, but it's flowing slow. That's what gives you your 50 kW max charging speed on those Lucid Airs. But if you look at vehicles like the Taycan actually has two different options. Standard is the 50 kW onboard, booster option when it comes to the DC fast charging converters. And then they also have an upgrade. I think you could purchase for like 1,500 bucks. And it's mainly used in a lot of those chargers out in Europe at 150 kW boosters. So all things considered, this is what EV manufacturers kind of talk about their conversion strategies when it comes to the DC fast charging realm, like the DC fast charging universe. That's kind of how it works. And so, if you know, like, okay, you have the Tesla Cybertruck, here's what they're coming on board, entering, but here's what the existing Hummer, Lucid Air, Taycan, you look at some of the stuff that the Ioniq 5 and EV6 are doing with their onboard booster. They basically just run the power cables through the existing charging, like the existing motors, like inverters in the back end, and regenerates the battery pack basically to power the battery at around 100 kW. So they're like, I don't know, like they're using existing hardware in the car to be able to get the same functionality that the Porsche Taycan has and the Lucid Air has. And Porsche Taycan makes you upgrade to have. It's like they're adding these manufacturers are putting more components in a car that weigh more, that cost more, that don't necessarily need to be there. And that's why I love the ingenious move behind the Ioniq 5 and EV6's thing, where they take that power cable, run it through the existing motor's inverter, and that distributes about 100 kW of power to the battery pack. And so when those cars pull up to 400 volt chargers, they're able to charge at 100 kW, whereas the Lucid and the Taycan are only able to get about 50 unless they have that upgraded option at 150 kW. So, look, if you want to look at today's value conclusion of our topics, what we're seeing is that since the Tesla Cybertruck has they have four 200 volt battery units inside its structural battery pack running in series. Okay. So that basically means that they're comprised of an 800 volt architecture using that. The DPDT switch allows the Cybertruck to switch between charging at 400 volts and charging at 800 volts without any losses or any hindrance with regards to that amperage like the other vehicles have. So that allows the charging speed to, let's say, at the 400 volt side, 30 minutes. At the 800 volt side, 20 minutes. It just reduces the amount of charging time that's necessary to charge the massive battery pack inside the Cybertruck. And so, look, once we get our hands on the Cybertruck and we are able to charge it at a fully functioning V4 Supercharger, we'll be able to learn more about the charging curve and kind of how they act given, the difference when charging at 400 volts and 800-volt environments. And so we're really super stoked on that particular end to kind of share and discuss that and kind of get into the real the real math behind that. But look, I want to thank you so much to our listeners and our subscribers for their time. I hope this episode has brought you a little bit more value to your day. I know we're all better for it. I love you. And yes, we can't do this without you. So I appreciate you so much for joining us today. Go ahead and click the thumbs up icon again. Like, share, comment, subscribe to our channel if you think we earned it. And thanks again for charging up with us today. Keep in mind, you can always find us at smartchargeramerica.com. And remember, folks, if you can't charge, you can't drive. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.